Have you ever met someone who seemed to have everything? Confidence that boarded up a room, confidence that bordered on invincibility, a presence so magnetic that others naturally revolved around them like planets around a full sun. But if you looked closely, you'd see it, that flicker in their eyes, a quiet sadness, a trace of emptiness hiding behind the practiced smile. That is the part they never let anyone see, because for the narcissist, the worst fear is not rejection, it's being seen for who they truly are, hollow. As the years pass, time begins to do what truth could not. It strips away the illusion. The beauty fades, the charm weakens, the audience grows silent. For decades they've lived inside a performance, mastering every expression, every gesture, every word that could earn admiration. But aging is a mirror they cannot manipulate. It doesn't flatter, it doesn't lie. And for the narcissist, that mirror becomes a nightmare. Behind closed doors, the laughter that once echoed in crowds dies into whispers. The phone stops ringing. The followers disappear. They stand in rooms once filled with applause, now filled only with echoes. Echoes of a persona that no longer works. The energy that once made them feel powerful now feels like a weight they can't carry. This isn't simply the story of a toxic personality. It's the tragedy of a soul that built its identity entirely on reflection, and now faces the terrifying moment when no one reflects it back. The outer world retreats, and what's left is an inner void so loud it begins to consume everything around it. Carl Jung once said, "What we resist persists," and in the twilight of the narcissist's life, everything they spent years running from, the guilt, the shame, the loneliness, comes home. The persona collapses, the mask rots, the false self dissolves under the weight of time. What remains is not power, not glory, not control, but a silence that feels like punishment and a truth that feels like death. In this video, we look beyond the mask. This is not revenge, it is revelation. Because sometimes the most haunting horror story is the one that happens inside a soul that can no longer pretend. Part 1. The Illusion of Invincibility. In their youth, the narcissist walks through life as if immortal. Every reflection confirms their existence. Every gaze, every compliment, every victory becomes proof that they are special, chosen, untouchable. They wear confidence like armor, charm like perfume, and attention like oxygen. People mistake this radiance for self-assurance, but it's not. It's dependency disguised as dominance. Because underneath the surface of grandiosity lies a fragile truth. Their sense of self is borrowed, not born. From the outside, they seem to have mastered the art of life, success, beauty, influence, all lined up like trophies displayed to silence the fear within. But the more they collect, the emptier they feel. For the narcissist, admiration is a drug. The dosage must increase with time or withdrawal begins. Each new admirer, each new achievement, each new mirror is only a temporary fix to an unhealed wound that whispers, "Without them you are nothing." Carl Jung once wrote that the persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself and others think one is. For the narcissist, this persona becomes their only identity. They lose the ability to distinguish between mask and soul. Every smile is a performance, every act of kindness an investment, every relationship a transaction. And for a time it works. The mask shines bright enough to blind everyone, even themselves. But time is the one critic that cannot be seduced. It does not applaud, it does not flatter, it only reveals. As the years pass, the flawless mask begins to show cracks. What once looked like confidence now looks like desperation for relevance. What once seemed like ambition now reeks of insecurity. The applause that once echoed everywhere starts to fade, and with it, the illusion of control. In youth, they could manipulate the narrative, change jobs, partners, social circles to keep the performance fresh. But aging traps them in a stage they can no longer redesign. Their reflection, once their greatest ally, becomes a source of quiet panic. Every wrinkle, every sag, every grey hair whispers the same unbearable truth. The world is moving on, and they cannot charm time. They start to feel something they've never truly felt before: vulnerability. But instead of embracing it, they fight it. They double down on the illusion. More filters, more stories, more performances. They chase youth the way an addict chases their first high. And the more they chase, the more grotesque the illusion becomes. Once they were adored for their confidence. Now they are pitied for their vanity. Once people followed their lead. Now they follow out of habit or out of fear. The narcissist senses this shift, even if no one says it out loud. The room that once vibrated with admiration now hums with polite tolerance. And that silent indifference wounds them more deeply than any open rejection ever could. Because indifference is the one mirror that gives them nothing back. The illusion of invincibility begins to crumble in the most ordinary ways. They post something online and receive fewer reactions than before. They enter a room and notice younger faces, drawing the attention they used to command effortlessly. They try to tell the same old stories, but no one laughs quite the same. Even their charm, that weapon they once wielded with mastery, starts to misfire. They cannot understand why people don't respond like they used to. But the truth is simple. The world has evolved, and authenticity has replaced performance. What they once mocked as weakness, humility, honesty, emotional depth, is now celebrated, and suddenly they find themselves outdated in a culture that no longer worships perfection but values vulnerability. This is the narcissist's quiet apocalypse. Not the loss of beauty, but the loss of relevance. In their desperation, some try to reinvent themselves, to modernize their persona, to adopt the language of empathy, to simulate authenticity. They mimic self-awareness, talk about healing, spirituality, or boundaries, but it's another mask, another play. And though they fool a few, they cannot fool time, because time doesn't listen to words, it listens to energy. And their energy, once magnetic, now feels off, heavy, anxious, forced. Behind every joke, there's tension. Behind every post, there's a silent question. Do you still see me? And behind every compliment they receive, there's the terror of the one they didn't. The illusion of invincibility has always been a fragile house of glass. It gleams under the light but cannot survive the storm. And aging for the narcissist is the first real storm they cannot manipulate, seduce, or escape. Their social strategies, once sharp as blades, grow dull. Their followers drift away. Their enemies stop caring. Their world grows smaller, not by punishment, but by natural law. Because what is false must eventually collapse under the weight of what is real. For most people, aging brings humility, a softening, a surrender, a new depth. But for the narcissist, it brings panic, because humility demands self-reflection, and reflection is the one thing they've avoided their entire lives. Jung called this the midlife confrontation with the shadow, the moment when every false identity begins to crumble and the truth demands entry. For the narcissist, this confrontation feels like death. You can see it in their eyes, the flicker of fear when the mask no longer works, the forced laughter that doesn't land, the restless energy of someone trying to outshine time itself. They are fighting an invisible enemy, not age, not people, but truth. The truth that everything they've built was made to be admired, not inhabited. And so, the horror begins, not in dramatic collapses, but in quiet moments of realization, when the audience doesn't laugh, when the mirror doesn't flatter, when the silence lasts a second too long. In those moments, they glimpse what they've always feared, a self that no longer exists without reflection. This is the first act of their downfall, the illusion of invincibility shattered by the mirror of time. Part 2. The empty echo chamber. There comes a moment in every narcissist's life when the echoes begin to fade. For decades they have lived inside a self-made theater, a world where every word, every gesture, every sigh was designed to provoke a reaction. They survived on applause, not air. Validation was their oxygen, control their heartbeat. But now, the stage lights dim, the audience leaves, and the silence that follows is unbearable. At first, they refuse to notice. They tell themselves it's just a phase. People are busy, the algorithm changed, their friends are distracted, but deep down they can feel it. The energy they used to command no longer answers their call. The spotlight, once loyal, has shifted elsewhere, and for someone who has never learned to exist without being seen, that absence is more terrifying than death. They start to repeat their old tricks, the same manipulative patterns that once pulled everyone back in. The charm offensive, the guilt trip, the subtle triangulation, the victim's story carefully crafted to elicit sympathy. But something's changed. People don't react the same way anymore. Their words land flat, their drama feels predictable, their tears, once powerful, now look rehearsed. That's when the panic begins to seep through the cracks of their polished exterior. They scan through their contacts, scrolling back through old messages, wondering who might still respond. They linger on old photos, re-watch old videos where they were adored, where eyes sparkled at their presence. But even nostalgia betrays them, because it reminds them of a time when they still mattered. The narcissist's world begins to shrink, not by explosion, but by quiet erosion. One friend pulls away, another stops replying, a child grows distant, a colleague finally sets a boundary. The room that once echoed with their laughter becomes smaller, colder, emptier, and the silence, that same silence they used to weaponize against others, now turns against them. Because silence, once a tool of control, becomes their punishment. There was a time when the narcissist could walk into any room and draw attention with ease. Now, when they speak, others glance at their phones, politely nod, and change the subject. The gravity they once held has weakened. The energy they once drained from others no longer replenishes them, and so begins the slow starvation of their false self. They try to find new supply, a new admirer, a new relationship, a new audience, but it never feels the same. The new faces don't carry the same awe. The new love doesn't reflect the same devotion. The cycle of seduction and evaluation no longer delivers the same high. Because something fundamental has shifted, people are more aware now. They recognize manipulation faster. They sense the hollowness beneath the charm, and that awareness is poison to the narcissist. They start to feel invisible. To them, invisibility isn't peace, it's annihilation. Their existence depends on reflection. When no one mirrors them, they vanish. They begin to talk louder, act bolder, make wilder claims, all to prove that they still exist. But the louder they become, the more people pull away. The more they demand attention, the more invisible they appear, because desperation has an energy that repels. Carl Jung said that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering, and that is exactly what happens now. Instead of sitting with the emptiness, the narcissist scrambles to fill it with distractions, addictions, and illusions of relevance. They turn to alcohol, work, sex, or online validation. Anything to drown the silence, anything to feel alive again. But the more they grasp, the faster everything slips through their fingers. Soon, even their own mind becomes a hostile environment. The voice that once whispered grandiose fantasies now starts to echo accusations. They've moved on. They don't need you. You're forgotten. They try to argue back, but the silence wins every time, because no amount of noise can drown the sound of truth. This is where the narcissist begins to understand the nature of the void they carry inside. It's not loneliness, it's the absence of self. For so long, their identity depended on others' perceptions, that without those mirrors, there's nothing left to reflect. No I, no essence, no core. Just echoes. They begin to haunt their own past, revisiting old relationships, resurfacing in old conversations, testing if they can still provoke a reaction. Sometimes they reach out with kindness, sometimes with cruelty, whichever gets attention. If you respond, they feel alive for a moment. If you ignore them, they spiral deeper into emptiness. Either way, the dynamic is the same. Reaction equals existence. But this time, the world doesn't play along. Their old tactics no longer yield results because the collective consciousness has shifted. The people who once gave them energy have learned boundaries. The partners who once begged for closure have gone silent. The children who once feared them have grown strong. The universe itself seems to mirror back their isolation, forcing them into a confrontation they've avoided all their lives. The confrontation with their own emptiness. The narcissist has spent years teaching others that love is conditional, that it must be earned through obedience, performance, or pain. Now they find themselves unable to earn love at all. Their own rules collapse around them. They finally face the question they've projected onto others. Who am I when no one is watching and there is no answer? Only echoes. The silence that follows becomes their new mirror, one that reflects nothing back. It is in that silence that the narcissist's final delusion begins to crumble, the belief that attention equals existence. Because now, in the absence of eyes to perform for, the truth begins to emerge. The truth that they never built a life, only an audience. And when the applause fades, all that remains is the stage itself, empty, dusty, forgotten. That is the true horror of the narcissist's later years. Not rejection, not loneliness, but irrelevance. The world keeps spinning, and for the first time, it spins without them at the center. Part 3. The Mirror of Time. There comes a point when even the most skillful illusionist must face the mirror, not the mirror of vanity, but the mirror of time. For the narcissist, this is the ultimate enemy, because time does what no human ever could. It tells the truth without mercy. It reflects not who they pretend to be, but who they've become. In the beginning, they try to fight it. They dress younger, speak louder, chase trends, flirt with youth, rewrite the past. They say they're just evolving, but it's not evolution. It's panic disguised as progress. Every wrinkle becomes an insult, every grey hair a personal betrayal. They look at their reflection as if it were an adversary conspiring against their illusion of eternal control. For a narcissist, the body was always a weapon, a vessel of attraction, a badge of power. But when age arrives, that weapon turns against them. Their beauty no longer commands obedience. Their charm no longer hypnotizes. The reflection that once fed them now starves them. And that is when the psychological decay begins. Slow, silent, but relentless. They begin to notice it in the way people speak to them. Softer, more distant, less impressed. The spotlight shifts to younger faces, and for the first time they are on the outside looking in. They scroll through social media and see the world racing forward, new voices rising, new stories being told, none of which include them. They smile on the surface, but inside they feel the quiet panic of a performer whose role has been written out of the script. This is when the mirror of time becomes unbearable. It no longer shows them who they want to be. It shows them what they've lost. And beneath the surface loss of beauty and status lies something much deeper, the loss of meaning. Because for the narcissist, meaning was never internal. It was always borrowed from attention, admiration, desire. Without those, life feels flat, tasteless, irrelevant. This is not ordinary sadness. It is existential starvation. The reflection that once provided identity now exposes its absence. They stare into the mirror, searching for the person they once were, the one who could walk into a room and be worshipped, who could bend others with a smile, who could rewrite reality with charisma. But the mirror does not lie. It shows the truth. The person they see now is not loved, but tolerated, not admired, but pitied, not powerful, but afraid. Carl Jung called this confrontation the death of the persona, the necessary collapse of the false self that one has mistaken for the soul. For most, this collapse brings humility, rebirth, and awakening. But for the narcissist, it brings terror. Because the false self isn't a layer they can remove, it's their entire structure. When the mask begins to rot, so does everything beneath it. They begin to spiral. Some retreat into denial, obsessing over youth, clinging to fashion, surgery, or fantasy. Others grow bitter, projecting their fear of decline onto those around them, criticizing the young, mocking the successful, attacking whatever reminds them of what they've lost. But underneath it all, there is one haunting realization they cannot escape. They have run out of mirrors. The friends who once flattered them have grown weary. The lovers who once adored them have turned cold. Even the children who once admired them now see through the act. The narcissist finds themselves surrounded not by applause, but by quiet. The kind of quiet that exposes everything they've hidden. At night, they lie awake replaying memories, trying to relive the moments when they felt alive. But memory is a cruel mirror too. It doesn't restore what's gone, it reminds them that it will never return. Their body begins to slow down. Their mind, once sharp with manipulation, starts to falter. They forget details, misplace lies, blur stories. Their own narrative begins to break apart, and with it, their grip on reality. Because without external validation, the narcissistic psyche loses its anchor. The mask starts to fracture, and behind it, there is nothing solid to fall back on. This is the stage Jung would call nigredo, the blackening, the symbolic death of the ego before transformation. But unlike the empath or the awakened soul who enters nigredo to be reborn, the narcissist resists it. They refuse to surrender, to let the old self die. They cling to their illusions with bloody hands, mistaking decay for dignity, and so the mirror of time becomes their hell. Each morning they wake to a reflection that feels less like themselves and more like a ghost. They add more makeup, more filters, more bravado, but the eyes give them away. The eyes no longer sparkle with vitality. They flicker with exhaustion, fear, and rage, because deep down they know the truth. Time has stripped away their camouflage. The performance is over. The audience has left. The costume no longer fits. But the most haunting part isn't the loss of beauty. It's the loss of control. Control over perception, over narrative, over others. For a narcissist, control was never just a habit. It was oxygen. And now, each breath feels thinner, each interaction more fragile. They begin to notice that others can see through them, that the old tricks don't land, that the world has developed immunity to their charm. And in that awareness, they feel the one thing they've spent a lifetime suppressing: shame. Shame is the shadow they've always projected onto others. But now, it returns home. It stares back at them through the mirror, whispering every truth they've denied. And, unlike before, there is no one left to blame. This is when many narcissists begin to self-destruct. Not publicly at first, but quietly, through sleepless nights, compulsive habits, restless guilt they don't understand. The very traits that once made them seem powerful, control, image, dominance, now become their prison bars. Because the energy it takes to maintain the illusion becomes unbearable. Some break down completely. Others grow paranoid, convinced that everyone is plotting against them. They misread kindness as pity, distance as betrayal, and love as mockery. The mirror has turned from an ally into a judge, and its verdict is always the same: you have become what you once feared. There is a profound sadness in this, because underneath the arrogance, the narcissist was never a villain by design. They were a wounded child who learned to survive by performance. But when the performance ends, that wounded child stands alone in the ruins of their own stage, confused, frightened, and unseen. Time, in its cruel mercy, gives them one final chance to look into the mirror, not with vanity, but with honesty. Few take it, most turn away. But for the rare few who dare to face what they've become, something extraordinary can happen. A moment of clarity, a flash of humility, a recognition that maybe the mask was never needed at all, because the mirror of time, while cruel, is also sacred. It destroys illusions not to punish, but to purify. It reveals decay, not to humiliate, but to free. And in that revelation, painful, raw, unfiltered, lies the final choice every soul must make, to keep pretending or to finally see. Part 4. Crumbling Facades, Shattered Worlds. When the mask finally begins to collapse, it doesn't fall all at once. It fractures, piece by piece, memory by memory, lie by lie. At first, the narcissist thinks they can repair it. They tighten their smile, rehearse their stories, polish the fragments, but no matter how much they try to hold it together, the cracks keep spreading. What once was charm now feels forced. What once was control now feels desperate. The persona that once commanded admiration now reeks of decay. In the early stages of this collapse, they double down. They can't bear to be ordinary. Obscurity feels like death, so they perform harder, louder, more excessively than ever. They pick new fights, chase younger lovers, launch doomed comebacks. They want to prove the world wrong, to prove that they are still relevant, still powerful, still adored. But every attempt only reveals how hollow they've become. The more they reach outward for meaning, the faster the inner void expands. This is when the world begins to see what the empath once saw first. The fragility behind the grandeur, the insecurity behind the arrogance. The old facade begins to crumble in public. Once their image was flawless. Now, small cracks show up in every conversation, every interaction. People start whispering about inconsistencies, about strange behavior, about emotional volatility, and the narcissist can feel it. They sense the eyes that used to admire them now watching with pity, curiosity, or worse, indifference. Carl Jung wrote that what you resist not only persists, but grows in size. And as the narcissist resists the truth, the consequences grow heavier. The first thing to collapse is their social world. Friends who once orbited them drift away. Colleagues stop protecting their image. Even family grows tired of walking on eggshells. One by one, the false alliances dissolve, revealing that what they mistook for loyalty was merely fear. And when fear fades, no one remains. Next, their inner world starts to shatter. Without the constant validation of others, their mind turns inward, and what they find there terrifies them. The silence they once used as a weapon becomes unbearable noise inside their head. They replay old humiliations, justify old cruelties, rewrite old stories. But the narrative no longer convinces even themselves. The lies that once sedated their conscience now sound hollow, almost childish, and deep within, something they've long buried begins to awaken: guilt. But guilt is a foreign language to the narcissist. They can't process it as remorse, only as rage. Rage at being exposed. Rage at losing control. Rage at the mirror that no longer lies. And so they project harder. They attack, smear, blame. They accuse everyone else of betrayal. But the fury burns faster now, shorter, more exhausting, because even their anger no longer gives them the high it used to. Then comes the psychological fragmentation. The false self, which for years served as a shield, begins to turn inward like a blade. They experience identity confusion, paranoia, emotional instability. They lash out at ghosts, pick fights over imagined slights, retreat into fantasy. In public, they still perform confidence. In private, they crumble. Some turn to substances, others to compulsions, trying to drown the gnawing awareness that the world no longer sees them the way they need to be seen. And for those still connected to them, the partner, the child, the parent, the collapse is brutal to witness. They see the deterioration firsthand, the mood swings, the desperate attention-seeking, the unpredictable cruelty. Living with a collapsing narcissist feels like standing next to a dying star, immense gravity pulling everything into its chaos before it implodes. The empath, once the main source of supply, now becomes the mirror of truth. The narcissist both craves and despises them. craves their compassion, despises their calm. In the empath's stillness, the narcissist sees everything they could have been, integrated, authentic, free, and that reflection burns them more than any punishment life could offer. This stage, the crumbling facade, is not just psychological, it's spiritual. For decades, the narcissist has built a false temple to the self, worshipping the image, the ego, the illusion of perfection. But when the temple collapses, what's revealed is not divinity but dust. The idol they worshipped was hollow, and the god they served, their own inflated ego, now devours them. Jung called this moment enantiodromia, the reversal of all things. What was once grand becomes grotesque. What was once control becomes chaos. The persona, once radiant, now decays into shadow. This reversal is the psyche's attempt at balance, the unconscious reclaiming what was denied. But for the narcissist, it feels like punishment from the universe itself. The external collapse soon mirrors the internal. Finances slip, health deteriorates, sleep becomes fractured, haunted by nightmares of exposure. The same mind that once orchestrated manipulation now turns against them, replaying their own deceit as evidence in a trial they cannot win. Their punishment is not imprisonment, it's awareness, and awareness, for the narcissist, is agony. They begin to see themselves through the eyes of those they have hurt. The empathy they once lacked returns, but too late, too violently. It arrives not as peace, but as torment. Every memory becomes a mirror, every name a ghost, every silence a verdict. Some collapse inward completely, living ghosts trapped in cycles of regret and delusion. Others lash outward, seeking new victims to rebuild their identity. But no matter what form it takes, the outcome is the same: entropy. The structure cannot sustain itself. The ego implodes. The mask disintegrates. The world, once carefully controlled, dissolves into fragments of reality they can no longer manipulate. For those who once loved them, this stage is confusing. You see glimpses of vulnerability, flashes of self-awareness. Then suddenly they attack again, desperate to reassert control. It's tempting to see these cracks as hope, but they're not healing, they're withdrawal symptoms. You're witnessing the dying convulsions of a false self. And yet, there's a paradox here, a dark mercy, because in that collapse lies the first real chance for redemption. Only when the false identity disintegrates can anything true emerge. But it requires surrender, humility, truth. Qualities the narcissist has spent a lifetime rejecting. Most never reach it. They fight until the very end, clinging to the ashes of the persona that once made them feel godlike. But for a rare few, those who have glimpsed the futility of their endless performance, something miraculous can occur. Not salvation, not immediately, but the first flicker of awareness, the faintest whisper that maybe, just maybe, the performance was never the point. Maybe the point was to finally see themselves beyond it. But until that moment of grace arrives, the collapse continues. The stage is empty, the mask lies shattered, and the world moves on, leaving behind a soul still trying to fix a mirror that was never meant to last. Part 5. Beyond the grandiose mask. When everything has fallen, the mask, the charm, the control, what remains is silence. Not the manipulative kind they once used, but the real kind. The silence of truth. It is here, stripped of applause, stripped of illusion, that the narcissist faces their final lesson. There was never anyone to conquer but themselves. Some fight this truth until their last breath, clinging to the ashes of their persona. Others, in rare moments of surrender, finally let the performance die. And for a fleeting instant, the human beneath the armor begins to breathe again. Carl Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. For those who dare to look inward, to see the wounded child beneath the arrogance, something sacred happens, the beginning of real humility. Beyond the grandiose mask, there is no monster. only a soul that forgot how to love, starting with itself. And maybe that's the quiet redemption time was always trying to offer. Not punishment, but purification. Not death, but truth. Because in the end, the greatest horror isn't being unloved. It's living a whole life without ever being real.